During the Second Boer War, 1899 and 1902, fought between the British Empire and two Boer republics, the South African Republic, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. A young Winston Churchill found himself at the center of a Boer ambush. His courage in the face of death or imprisonment would shape his future as one of history's most iconic leaders. The war was the culmination of years of tension between the British and the Boers, primarily over issues of sovereignty, the control of valuable natural resources, particularly gold, and British imperial expansion in southern Africa. Winston Churchill, at 24 years old, had already served as a soldier and war correspondent in several campaigns. He had been involved in the Malakand field force in British India and participated in the Battle of Omdurman in Sudan. Churchill was eager to make a name for himself in both military and political spheres, and he believed that covering the Boer War would provide him with the opportunity to advance both his writing career and his public reputation. Welcome to the shadows and the past, where history meets mystery, and the past is your present. Hit the like and subscribe to join us as we delve into a world where the boundaries between survival and demise are as unpredictable as the winds that whip across the sweeping expanses and raw simplicity of the incomparable African veldt. As the Boer War unfolded, the fate of the Boers in a conventional war became clear. Attrition would be their undoing. Lacking the capacity to replace casualties or captured men, their forces dwindled. Meanwhile, the British Empire, in its vastness, summoned troops from across the globe, Canada, Australia, and India swelling its ranks. Before his capture, Churchill viewed the Boers through a lens shaped by political contacts and pro-British sentiment. To him, they were a backward people, clinging to outdated ways, defiant of progress. In November 1899, Churchill had hoped to witness the siege of Ladysmith firsthand, believing it would provide the drama he sought as a war correspondent. But the town was already surrounded by Boer forces, leaving Churchill stranded in Estcourt, a mere 40 miles away. Restless and eager to plunge into the fray, he tried in vain to find a way through the Boer lines. Ironically, it was his relentless determination, so often his strength, that led to his capture aboard an armored train. His first attempt to reach Ladysmith involved bribing a cavalry soldier stationed nearby, but the plan fell through. Unfazed, Churchill chose to join a reconnaissance mission aboard an armored train under the command of Captain Haldane, a man he knew from earlier military campaigns. The objective was to scout Boer positions near Colenso, just 14 miles south of Ladysmith, and return to Estcourt. On the 15th of November 1899, the train, a behemoth of steel, carried 120 men, including Churchill. Ever perceptive, Churchill understood the risks. While the armored train appeared indomitable, he recognized its fragility, noting that nothing looks more formidable, yet nothing is more vulnerable and helpless. Nevertheless, his optimism remained unshaken, and he believed no great misfortune would befall them. The ambush was swift and brutal. After a quiet 14-mile journey, the train reached Chively, where Churchill and others spotted a distant group of Boer horsemen. As the train turned back toward Estcourt, rifle fire erupted from a ridge 600 yards away. The Boers had laid a trap, and their field guns and Maxim machine guns soon opened up. The engineer, gripped by panic, increased speed, but the train barreled into a boulder strategically placed on the tracks. Several cars derailed, leaving the locomotive stranded. In the chaos that followed, Churchill's leadership and courage were undeniable. Under heavy fire, he quickly assessed the situation, conferred with Haldane, and sprinted ahead to see if the locomotive could be moved. For the next hour, he worked tirelessly under relentless Boer fire, inspiring the terrified engineer and organizing the soldiers to push the wreckage off the tracks. Even as the Boer attack intensified, Churchill refused to falter. He led efforts to move the locomotive forward, but the engine detached from the rear cars, leaving many men behind. With no time to spare, Churchill and Haldane devised a plan to save the wounded. They loaded the injured onto the locomotive and directed the remaining men to use it as cover while retreating. Boer fire rained down as they made their escape, but Churchill's quick thinking ensured that the train slowed enough to allow the soldiers to catch up. In a final act of selflessness, Churchill disembarked from the relative safety of the train to return for Haldane and the others still on foot. It was here, in the face of certain capture, that his courage shone brightest. Churchill, ever intent on aiding his comrades, moved towards the rear when he spotted two figures on the track. At first he mistook them for rail workers, but a moment later the truth hit him: Boers. As they raised their rifles, Churchill dashed for the river, but a bullet splinter grazed his hand. Moments later, a Boer horseman appeared, rifle trained on him. Realizing there was no escape, Churchill surrendered, recalling Napoleon's words, "When one is alone and unarmed, a surrender may be pardoned." As he was marched away under guard, a heavy rain began to fall, a fitting reflection of his mood. Just days earlier, Churchill had written home, urging a fellow officer to discourage surrender at all costs. Now he found himself among the ranks of the captured. To his surprise, the Boers treated Churchill with civility. They tended to his injuries, offered him a hat in the rain, and even spoke English with him. Churchill, humbled by their professionalism, began to see the Boers in a new light. Despite their ferocity in battle, they were far from the barbaric caricatures he had once imagined. They quickly realized that Churchill, the son of a prominent family and a well-known journalist, would be a valuable prisoner. Thus, while non-combatants were typically released, Churchill would remain in captivity, perhaps in part at least, due to his participation in the melee. Depressed by his predicament, Churchill nevertheless engaged in spirited conversations with his Boer captors. These exchanges opened his eyes to the Boer perspective on the war. He learned that the Boers viewed the conflict as a struggle for survival, both cultural and economic. Their disdain for British social reforms, particularly those aimed at granting rights to black Africans, was profound, and Churchill began to grasp the depth of their resistance to British rule. The Boers marched Churchill and other prisoners north toward Pretoria, where they would be held. Along the way, Churchill discerned two key themes from his conversations: the Boer resentment of capitalist exploitation in South Africa and their refusal to accept British reforms. For them, it was a fight to preserve their way of life, a struggle that Churchill, despite his imperialist leanings, began to understand. Churchill arrived in Pretoria, where he was held with other British officers. Though far from home, his captors treated him with respect, a lesson he would carry with him in the years to come when dealing with the defeated. This experience of captivity, far from breaking his spirit, galvanized his ambition. Later, as colonial undersecretary in 1906, Churchill would help draft constitutions granting independence to both the Transvaal and Orange Free State, the very Boer republics against which he had fought. His time as a prisoner had imbued him with a compassion and understanding for his former enemies, shaping his vision of fair governance. During his imprisonment, Churchill's life was not unbearable. He was able to purchase goods, send letters, and maintain a semblance of comfort. He even bought a tweed suit, which would later play a role in his escape. Yet, despite these amenities, Churchill felt the bitter sting of inaction. He feared that his time in captivity would rob him of his chance to build his reputation further, both as a correspondent and a future political leader. Churchill's growing fame as a result of his bravery aboard the armored train did not escape notice. He had become a national celebrity, though he did not yet know it. The newspapers in England and South Africa lauded his actions, even if his official recognition as a soldier was withheld. Still, his reputation soared, setting the stage for his political ascent. In the years to come, Churchill's experience in the Boer War would remain a defining chapter in his life. It was a crucible in which his courage, leadership, and compassion were forged. The lessons learned on that fateful armored train and during his time in captivity would echo throughout his political career. They taught him that even in the midst of conflict, respect for one's enemies and fairness in victory were paramount. And so, as history would show, Churchill's ambition and destiny were inextricably linked to that war in the far-off veld, where his bravery and resilience shone brightly amidst the storm of battle and the shadow of defeat. Ah well, such is life in the shadows. If you'd like more secret stories of cunning, endurance and iron resolve, hit the like and subscribe to ride along as we explore the secrets lurking in the shadows and echoing through the corridors of the past. And if you like gallant stories like this one, click the link to learn the lessons of First Lieutenant George Patton's iconic introduction to war as he charged the United States enemies in the world's first motorized assault at a dusty hacienda in the shadow of Mexico's magnificent Sierra Madres in the spring of 1916. Welcome to the shadows and the past, where history meets mystery, and the past is your present.